The radio crackled with static as Colonel Marcus Thorne adjusted his headset, sweat beading on his forehead despite the morning chill. Intelligence reports had been wrong before, but never this catastrophically. What should have been a routine extraction from the Syrian border had devolved into a nightmare scenario, his platoon pinned down by coordinated sniper fire from 3 directions, ammunition running dangerously low, and the nearest friendly forces 2 hours out by ground transport. Actual, this is Bravo 7. His voice carried the controlled tension of a 20-year veteran who'd seen too many operations go sideways. We are taking effective fire from Grid November 774. Request immediate close air support. The response from command came through crystal clear, carrying an edge of bureaucratic dismissal that made Thorne's jaw tighten. Bravo 7, negative on CAS. Air assets are committed to higher priority operations. Recommend you establish defensive perimeter and wait for ground reinforcement. Thorne ducked as another round sparked off the concrete barrier protecting his position, fragments of masonry showering his helmet. Around him, his soldiers, men and women he'd trained, fought beside, trusted with his life, pressed themselves against whatever cover they could find. Sergeant Williams, barely 19 with dirt-streaked cheeks, looked to him with the kind of faith that made command both a privilege and a burden. "Sir," Williams whispered, her voice barely audible over the intermittent crack of gunfire, "what's the play?" Before Thorne could respond, his radio erupted with an unfamiliar voice, calm, professional, with just the slightest hint of southern drawl. "Bravo 7, this is Raven 1-1. I'm approximately 3 minutes out from your position. Please mark your location with smoke." Thorne frowned, pressing the radio closer to his ear. "Raven 1-1, I have no air support authorized for this AO. Identify yourself." "Bravo 7, call sign is Peregrine. I'm flying solo today, and I'm here whether command likes it or not." The colonel felt a surge of irritation. Some hotshot pilot freelancing in his operational area was the last thing he needed. "Peregrine, return to base immediately. We don't need air support from some." His words died in his throat as the unmistakable roar of twin turbofan engines suddenly filled the valley, growing from a distant whisper to a thunderous crescendo in seconds. The F-15 E-Strike Eagle materialized over the ridgeline like an avenging angel, flying so low that dust devils swirled in its wake. The aircraft seemed to hang in the air for an impossible moment, its gray and green camouflage pattern stark against the cloudless sky, before banking sharply to begin its attack run. The ground trembled beneath Thorne's boots. The enemy fire stopped. In the sudden, profound silence that followed, Colonel Thorne realized he was about to witness something extraordinary. Major Kaida, Peregrine Nakamura, had arrived. Kaida's fingers moved across the flight controls with the precision of a concert pianist, her years of training condensed into muscle memory that operated below conscious thought. The targeting pod display showed heat signatures scattered across the ridgeline, 3 distinct positions forming a classic L-shaped ambush. "Professional work," she noted grimly. These weren't amateur insurgents. Someone with real tactical knowledge had positioned these shooters. "Bravo 7, Peregrine. I have 3 confirmed hostile positions. Grid November 774, November 781, and November 787. Can you confirm friendlies are marked with orange smoke?" Colonel Thorne's voice came back tense but grateful. "Confirmed, Peregrine. Orange smoke marking friendly position. All hostiles are north of the road." Kaida adjusted her approach vector, the F-15's nose dropping as she lined up for a gun run. The GAU-8 cannon wasn't standard equipment on a Strike Eagle. That was the A-10's territory, but her bird carried a different kind of precision death. The targeting computer painted solutions across her heads-up display as she acquired the first position. "Bravo 7, guns, guns, guns." The 20mm cannon erupted in controlled bursts, each pull of the trigger sending armor-piercing rounds downrange at nearly 4,000 feet per second. Through her targeting pod, Kaida watched the first sniper position disintegrate in clouds of dust and debris. She pulled up hard, G-forces pressing her into her ejection seat as she banked for the second pass. The radio filled with excited chatter from the ground team. "Holy shit, Peregrine. Direct hit on position 1. They're running from position 2. Bravo 7, maintain radio discipline." Thorne's voice cut through the excitement, though she could hear the relief underneath his professional tone. "Peregrine, you have 2 positions remaining." "Copy that, Bravo 7. Coming around for pass 2. Kaida's eyes swept across her instrument panel. Fuel good. Weapon systems green. No warning lights. The F-15 responded to her inputs like an extension of her own body, rolling into the attack angle with lethal grace. Below, she could see muzzle flashes from the remaining positions as the enemy forces realized their predicament. They were trapped between her aerial assault and Thorne's ground team, their carefully planned ambush collapsing into desperate flight. Position 2, guns, guns, guns. Another burst from the cannon sent the second team scrambling for cover that no longer existed. Kaida watched through her targeting pod as figures abandoned their weapons and began running across the open ground toward a cluster of buildings 500 meters north. Classic panic response, the kind of mistake that turned professionals into casualties in the span of heartbeats. She keyed her radio again. "Bravo 7, I have multiple squirters moving north toward the village. Do you want me to pursue?" The pause that followed lasted several seconds, and when Thorne's voice returned, it carried a different quality, the sound of a ground commander reassessing his opinion of air support. "Negative, Peregrine, let them run. You've broken their attack." As Kaida pulled up from her second pass, climbing back to a safe altitude while maintaining overwatch of the area, she allowed herself a small smile. Another successful close air support mission, another group of American soldiers going home to their families. It never got old, this feeling of making a difference. Her father would have been proud. The silence on the ground stretched for nearly a minute before Colonel Thorne's voice crackled through the radio again, this time without the edge of command authority. Just one professional soldier speaking to another. "Peregrine, this is Bravo 7 Actual. I owe you an apology." Kaida banked the F-15 into a lazy orbit above the valley, her eyes constantly scanning for any signs of renewed enemy activity. The targeting pod showed the area clear. No heat signatures, no movement, just the cooling debris of what had been, minutes earlier, a sophisticated ambush position. Below, she could see Thorne's soldiers beginning to move from cover, their relief visible even from her altitude. "No apology necessary, Bravo 7. Just doing my job." "Negative, Peregrine." Thorne's voice carried the weight of a man acknowledging his own prejudices. "I made assumptions before I knew who you were or what you could do. That was unprofessional of me." The admission hung in the air between them, transmitted across radio waves, but carrying the kind of honesty that built trust between warriors. Kaida had heard variations of this conversation before, the surprise in ground commanders' voices when they realized their air support was being provided by someone who didn't fit their expectations. A woman, an Asian American, someone who looked more likely to be found in a corporate boardroom than strapped into the cockpit of a multi-million-dollar fighter aircraft. "Colonel, with respect, I've been flying combat missions for 12 years. I stopped keeping track of apologies a long time ago." 12 years. There was genuine surprise in Thorne's voice. "How long have you been in country?" "This deployment, 6 months, but I've been rotating through this region since 2011. Kaida checked her fuel gauge, still plenty for extended overwatch, though she'd need to head back to base within the hour. "Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Jordan, pretty much anywhere the Air Force needed someone to put warheads on foreheads." Sergeant Williams' voice cut into the conversation, young and awed. "Sir, is that really a woman flying that F-15? Thorne's response was sharp with the kind of authority that cut through assumptions. "Sergeant, that's Major Peregrine, and she just saved our asses. Her gender is irrelevant to her ability to deliver ordnance on target. Copy that, sir. I just meant, that was some incredible flying, ma'am. Kaida felt the familiar warmth that came with recognition from fellow service members. Not because of her gender, not despite it, but simply because she was good at her job. Thanks, Sergeant. Stay safe down there. As she continued her orbit, Kaida's mind wandered to the conversation she'd have with Command when she returned to base. Flying an unauthorized mission into Syrian airspace would generate paperwork, questions, and probably a formal reprimand. But looking down at Thorne's soldiers as they began their extraction, safely moving toward their rendezvous point instead of fighting for their lives in an untenable position, she knew she'd make the same choice again. The sky belonged to those who dared to claim it, and today it had belonged to her. The flight back to Al Udeid Air Base gave Kaida 43 minutes to prepare for the conversation she knew was coming. The radio had been ominously quiet since she'd reported mission complete and departed the target area, which meant someone with stars on their collar was making phone calls and reviewing flight logs. Unauthorized deployment of air assets in a foreign combat zone wasn't the kind of thing that got overlooked, even when the mission succeeded. She guided the F-15 through its final approach, the familiar weight of the aircraft settling onto the runway with the precise control that came from thousands of hours in the cockpit. As she taxied toward the flight line, Kaida could see the reception committee waiting for her, maintenance crews, of course, but also the unmistakable figure of Colonel Sarah Mitchell, her squadron commander, standing with her arms crossed and an expression that promised an uncomfortable debrief. After shutdown procedures, Kaida climbed down from the cockpit and pulled off her helmet, her black hair falling in waves around her shoulders. The heat of the Qatari afternoon hit her immediately, a stark contrast to the climate-controlled environment of the fighter's cockpit. She'd barely touched the tarmac when Colonel Mitchell approached, her stride carrying the kind of authority that made junior officers straighten their postures instinctively. Major Nakamura. Mitchell's voice was professionally neutral, giving nothing away. Interesting flight plan today. Yes, ma'am. Kaida held her ground, meeting her commander's gaze directly. I received a distress call from a ground unit taking effective fire. I responded. A distress call that wasn't routed through proper channels. A mission that wasn't authorized by command. In airspace that required diplomatic clearance. Mitchell's enumeration of violations was delivered with surgical precision. Would you like to explain how that happened? Before Kaida could respond, another voice cut across the flight line. Colonel Mitchell, this is Colonel Thorne, Bravo 7 Actual. Both women turned to see Thorne approaching from a communications building, his uniform still showing the dust and wear of combat operations. His face carried the kind of exhaustion that came from leading soldiers in life-or-death situations, but his eyes were clear and determined. Colonel Thorne, Mitchell's tone remained carefully neutral. I understand you had some excitement today. Ma'am, I want to make something very clear. Thorne stopped directly in front of them, his posture carrying the authority of a man who'd earned his rank through 20 years of ground combat. Major Nakamura's intervention saved American lives today. My unit was pinned down by coordinated sniper fire, taking casualties, with no support authorized or available. She responded to our distress call and neutralized the threat. Mitchell's expression didn't change. Colonel, I appreciate the tactical situation you faced. However, Major Nakamura violated standing orders by deploying without authorization. With respect, ma'am, Thorne's voice carried an edge of controlled anger, standing orders that would have resulted in dead American soldiers. The three officers stood in a triangle of tension on the flight line, the sound of aircraft engines and maintenance operations, providing a backdrop to a conversation that would determine Kaida's future in the Air Force. The standoff on the tarmac might have continued indefinitely if not for the arrival of a staff car bearing diplomatic plates. The black sedan pulled up with the kind of practiced efficiency that suggested its passenger, was accustomed to interrupting important conversations. When the rear door opened, Ambassador Patricia Henley emerged, a woman whose reputation for pragmatic diplomacy had earned her postings to some of the world's most challenging regions. Colonel Mitchell, Colonel Thorne. Henley's acknowledgement was brisk but professional. Major Nakamura, I believe we need to discuss this morning's activities. Mitchell's posture stiffened slightly. Diplomatic intervention in military matters was never a good sign, particularly when it came from someone with Henley's influence. Ambassador, how can we assist you? By understanding that what happened today represents a significant diplomatic success. Henley's tone carried the confidence of someone who'd spent decades navigating complex international situations. The Syrian government has been looking for an excuse to escalate tensions in that border region. A prolonged firefight involving American casualties would have provided exactly the justification they needed. She gestured toward Qaeda. Major Nakamura's rapid intervention prevented that scenario. The engagement lasted less than 10 minutes, resulted in no American casualties, and demonstrated precision rather than the kind of overwhelming force that photographs badly in international media. Thorne nodded grimly. The intelligence reports we received were deliberately misleading. Someone wanted us walking into that ambush. Which brings us to the larger question, Henley continued. How did Major Nakamura know to respond when command had denied close air support? Qaeda had been dreading this question, but she met the ambassador's gaze steadily. Ma'am, I monitor multiple frequencies during patrol flights. When I heard Colonel Thorne's situation and command's response, I made a tactical decision. You violated direct orders, Mitchell stated flatly. I prevented a diplomatic incident, Henley countered. Sometimes those are the same action. The ambassador turned to face Mitchell directly. Colonel, I've spent the last 4 hours on conference calls with State Department officials, Pentagon liaisons, and Syrian government representatives. Everyone agrees that Major Nakamura's actions were precisely what the situation required. Fast, targeted, effective, and concluded before media attention could complicate matters. Mitchell's expression remained neutral, but Qaeda could see the calculation behind her eyes. Diplomatic support at this level meant the conversation had moved far beyond squadron discipline and into the realm of international relations. What exactly are you recommending, Ambassador? Henley smiled, the kind of expression that suggested she'd already won the argument but was polite enough to let everyone else reach the same conclusion. I'm recommending that Major Nakamura receive a commendation for exceptional performance under challenging circumstances. Her ability to assess rapidly developing situations and respond appropriately represents exactly the kind of tactical judgment we need in this region. The silence that followed was filled with the distant roar of aircraft and the steady rhythm of military operations continuing around them. Finally, Mitchell nodded slowly. Very well. Major Nakamura, report to my office at 800 tomorrow for a full debrief. As the group began to disperse, Thorne approached Qaeda one more time. Major, my soldiers wanted me to pass along their thanks. Qaeda smiled. Tell them to stay safe out there, Colonel. By the time the sun set over the Persian Gulf, word of Major Qaeda Nakamura's unauthorized rescue mission had spread throughout Al-Udeid like wildfire. The story grew with each retelling. The lone F-15 appearing out of nowhere, the precision strikes that broke a coordinated ambush, the ground commander who'd initially dismissed air support eating his words. In the enlisted mess halls and officer clubs, the tale took on the mythic quality that military legends acquire when they combine exceptional skill with a healthy disregard for bureaucracy. But for Qaeda herself, the day ended quietly in her quarters, reviewing the mission footage on her laptop. The targeting pod recordings showed the engagement from beginning to end, her approach vector, the precision of her gun runs, the immediate cessation of enemy fire. 12 minutes and 37 seconds from first radio contact to mission complete. Not her fastest response time, but effective enough to save lives. A knock on her door interrupted her analysis. She opened it to find Captain Jamie Torch Rodriguez, her wingman for most combat missions, and one of the few people on base who understood the unique pressures that came with being a minority in a male-dominated field. "Heard you had an interesting day," Rodriguez said, inviting herself in with the casual familiarity of shared combat experiences. "Interesting is one word for it." Kaida gestured toward the laptop screen. "Want to see how command really feels about initiative." Rodriguez settled into the desk chair and watched the mission footage with the critical eye of an experienced combat pilot. Clean gun runs, minimal collateral damage, threat neutralized without escalation. From a tactical perspective, this is textbook close air support. From a command perspective, it's insubordination. From a diplomatic perspective, it's a career-making decision, Rodriguez countered. Henley doesn't throw around commendations for pilots who cause her problems. Kaida closed the laptop and leaned back on her bunk. "You know what the hardest part is? Not the flying, not the combat, not even the politics. It's knowing that every mission, every decision, every success or failure gets evaluated through the lens of being different. If I succeed, it's because I'm exceptional. If I fail, it's because women or minorities don't belong in the cockpit." Rodriguez nodded with the understanding of someone who'd faced similar scrutiny. The burden of representation. Everything we do reflects on everyone who looks like us. Exactly. And today I risked not just my career, but reinforcing every stereotype about women pilots being too emotional, too willing to break rules, Kaida searched for the right word, too female. "Except you weren't being emotional," Rodriguez pointed out. "You were being tactical. You assessed a rapidly developing situation, identified the optimal response, and executed flawlessly. That's not female or male thinking, that's pilot thinking." Through the window of her quarters, Kaida could see the flight line where ground crews prepared aircraft for the next day's missions. F-15s, F-16s, and A-10s in neat rows, each one representing billions of dollars of military hardware and countless hours of pilot training. But more than that, they represented the hope that American service members around the world carried with them. The knowledge that if everything went wrong, someone would come to help. The next morning's debrief lasted 3 hours and covered every aspect of Kaida's decision-making process. Colonel Mitchell, Ambassador Henley, and a representative from Central Command dissected the mission from multiple angles: tactical, diplomatic, legal, and procedural. Kaida answered each question with the precision her training demanded, explaining her assessment of the situation, her evaluation of available options, and her reasoning for immediate intervention. "Major Nakamura," the CENTCOM representative finally said, "your actions were technically in violation of standing orders. However, the outcome achieved exactly what our mission parameters require: protection of American forces with minimal escalation and no diplomatic complications." Ambassador Henley leaned forward. "Which brings us to the larger question. How do we ensure that future situations receive this kind of rapid, effective response without requiring individual pilots to make unauthorized decisions?" Colonel Mitchell had been silent for most of the debrief, but now she spoke with the authority of someone who'd reached a conclusion. "We modify our close air support protocols to allow for immediate response to American forces under fire, subject to post-mission review." "The Peregrine Protocol," Henley suggested with a slight smile. Kaida felt a flush of surprise. Having a tactical procedure named after her call sign was the kind of recognition that typically came after decades of service, not from a single mission. "Ma'am, that's not necessary." "Major," Mitchell interrupted, "exceptional performance deserves exceptional recognition. Your ability to assess and respond to rapidly developing situations represents exactly the kind of tactical judgment we need from our combat pilots. The CENTCOM representative nodded agreement. Major Nakamura, you're being reassigned to a new position, Special Operations Liaison for Combat Air Support. You'll work directly with ground commanders to develop rapid response protocols and train other pilots in immediate threat assessment. As the meeting concluded and the participants filed out, Kaida remained seated for a moment, processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. A single decision to help fellow service members had resulted in a new assignment, a modified protocol bearing her call sign, and the kind of career advancement that typically took years to achieve. Colonel Mitchell paused at the door. "Major, you made the right choice yesterday. Don't second-guess yourself." That evening, Kaida called her father in California, reaching him during his morning routine of reading newspapers and drinking coffee on the porch of the house where she'd grown up. Hiroshi Nakamura had served as a Navy physician during the Gulf War, and his understanding of military service ran deep. "Dad, I wanted to tell you about something that happened yesterday." She related the story, the distress call, her decision to respond, the successful mission, and the aftermath. Her father listened without interruption, occasionally making small sounds of acknowledgement that indicated he was following the tactical details. "Kaida-chan," he said when she finished, using the childhood nickname that always made her feel connected to her family despite the distance. "Do you remember why you wanted to fly?" The question brought back memories of childhood visits to air shows, of watching the Thunderbirds perform aerial demonstrations, of the moment she decided that someday she would pilot aircraft like those. "Because I wanted to help people." "And yesterday?" "Yesterday I helped people." "Then you did exactly what you were meant to do." His voice carried the quiet pride that had sustained her through flight school, combat training, and the countless challenges of building a military career. "Your grandmother would have said you honored the family name." After ending the call, Kaida stepped outside her quarters and looked up at the night sky. Stars were visible despite the base lighting, and somewhere among them, satellites and aircraft moved with purposes she couldn't see but understood. The vast sky that had called to her since childhood now felt less like an escape and more like a responsibility, a domain where she could make a difference for people she'd never meet, in situations she couldn't predict. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of activity as Kaida began her new assignment. Her office was located in a secure building that housed special operations planning, a maze of conference rooms where joint missions took shape and tactical decisions influenced events across multiple theaters of operation. The work was different from flying combat missions, more strategic, more collaborative, requiring her to think beyond individual aircraft and consider how air power integrated with ground operations, intelligence gathering, and diplomatic objectives. Her first major project involved developing response protocols for situations like the one Colonel Thorne's unit had faced. Working with ground commanders, air traffic controllers, and legal advisors, Kaida crafted procedures that balanced the need for rapid response with the requirements of command authority and international law. The Peregrine Protocol became a formal doctrine within 6 weeks, establishing clear criteria for immediate air support deployment when American forces faced imminent threat. Major Nakamura, "We're getting reports from 3 different theaters that ground commanders are specifically requesting air support under Peregrine Protocol guidelines," Captain Rodriguez reported during one of their weekly coordination meetings. Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria, all successful interventions, all concluded without escalation. Kaida reviewed the mission reports spread across her desk. Each one represented American service members who'd made it home safely because help arrived when they needed it most. The tactical details varied, different aircraft, different threats, different geographical challenges, but the underlying principle remained constant. When Americans were in danger, someone would respond immediately. What's the feedback from the pilots? Mixed, Rodriguez admitted. Some love the autonomy to respond without waiting for authorization. Others are nervous about taking responsibility for decisions that used to be made by higher-ranking officers. It was a predictable response, Qaeda reflected. Military culture emphasized following orders and maintaining clear chains of command. Asking pilots to make independent tactical decisions required a different mindset, one that balanced training with judgment and procedures with initiative. We need to address that in the training program, she decided. Pilots need to understand that this isn't about bypassing authority. It's about exercising the kind of tactical judgment they're trained for. Her phone rang, displaying a number she didn't recognize but with a prefix that indicated a call from within the Pentagon. When she answered, the voice on the other end was crisp and professional. Major Nakamura, this is General Patricia Hawkins, Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations. I understand you've been developing some innovative approaches to close air support. Qaeda straightened in her chair. General Hawkins was a legend, the first woman to command a fighter wing in combat, the architect of several successful air campaigns, and widely regarded as one of the most tactically brilliant officers in the Air Force. Yes, ma'am. The Peregrine Protocol has been implemented across 3 theaters with positive results. I'm flying to Al Udeid next week. I'd like to discuss expanding your work to other areas of air power integration. Are you available for a meeting? The conversation that followed would reshape not just Qaeda's career, but her understanding of how individual decisions could influence military doctrine at the highest levels. General Hawkins arrived at Al Udeid on a gray Tuesday morning, her arrival marked by the kind of efficient coordination that surrounded senior officers. Qaeda had spent the previous 3 days preparing briefing materials, reviewing successful Peregrine Protocol implementations, and analyzing feedback from ground commanders and pilots across multiple theaters. The general was smaller than Qaeda had expected, perhaps 5 feet 4 inches, but her presence filled the briefing room with the kind of authority that came from 3 decades of making life-and-death decisions. Her gray hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her flight suit bore the wings and ribbons of someone who'd earned respect through competence rather than rank alone. Major Nakamura, Hawkins began without preamble, I've read your protocol development work. I've also read the after-action reports from 17 different missions where your procedures were implemented. What I want to understand is how you identified the gap between what our doctrine prescribed and what the tactical situation required. Qaeda had anticipated this question. Ma'am, the gap became apparent when I monitored ground unit communications during my combat patrols. I heard multiple instances where American forces requested air support, were denied due to procedural requirements, and faced escalating threats as a result. The time delay between request, authorization, and deployment was creating tactical disadvantages. And your solution was to bypass the authorization process. My solution was to establish criteria that would allow immediate response while maintaining command oversight through post-mission review. Qaeda gestured toward the briefing slides displaying mission outcomes. The result has been faster response times, reduced American casualties, and no instances of unauthorized escalation. Hawkins studied the data for several minutes, her expression revealing nothing. Major, I want you to understand something. What you've developed here isn't just a tactical innovation. It's a fundamental shift in how we think about command authority in rapidly developing situations. She stood and moved to the map of operational theaters that covered one wall of the briefing room. Traditionally, military doctrine has emphasized centralized decision-making because it provides control and prevents individual units from acting in ways that conflict with larger strategic objectives. But modern combat scenarios, particularly counterterrorism operations, often develop faster than centralized authority can respond. Qaeda nodded. Yes, ma'am. The Peregrine Protocol attempts to address that timing disconnect. It does more than that, Hawkins continued. It places tactical decision-making authority at the level where the most complete information is available, the pilot who can see the developing situation in real time. That requires a different kind of training, a different kind of officer, and a different kind of trust between command levels. The general turned back to face Kaida directly. Major, I'm offering you a position on my staff at the Pentagon, Director of Tactical Innovation Development. Your job would be to identify other areas where doctrine lags behind tactical reality and develop solutions that maintain operational effectiveness while preserving command authority. The offer was everything Kaida had worked toward throughout her career: recognition at the highest levels, the opportunity to influence military doctrine, a chance to shape how the Air Force approached combat operations. But it would also mean leaving operational flying, trading the cockpit for conference rooms, and the immediacy of combat for the longer timelines of institutional change. Ma'am, may I ask why you're offering this position to me specifically? Hawkins smiled, the first time her expression had softened during the entire meeting. Because you've demonstrated something rare, Major. The ability to make the right decision when following orders would produce the wrong outcome. That kind of judgment can't be taught, but it can be developed and applied to larger problems. The week following General Hawkins' visit brought a series of conversations that would define the next phase of Kaida's career. Phone calls with mentors, discussions with fellow pilots, and long evening walks around the base perimeter as she weighed the implications of accepting a Pentagon assignment. Captain Rodriguez found her on one of these walks, falling into step beside her as they followed the fence line that separated the base from the Qatari desert beyond. "You're thinking about taking the Pentagon job," Rodriguez observed. It wasn't a question. "I'm thinking about a lot of things." Kaida's response was honest but incomplete. "Flying combat missions, developing doctrine, whether I can make more of a difference in a cockpit or a conference room." "What does your gut tell you?" It was a pilot's question, the kind of inquiry that got to the heart of decision-making under pressure. In the cockpit, there were moments when instruments and training and procedures all provided guidance, but ultimately success depended on the pilot's ability to synthesize information and trust their instincts. "My gut tells me that changing how the Air Force thinks about tactical decision-making could save more lives than any individual combat mission." They walked in comfortable silence for several minutes, the distant sounds of base operations providing a familiar backdrop. Aircraft engines, vehicle traffic, the occasional announcement over the public address system, the rhythms of military life that had become second nature to both women. "Kaida, can I tell you something?" Rodriguez's voice carried the weight of friendship earned through shared danger. "When I first heard about your unauthorized mission, my initial reaction was concern, not because you'd made the wrong tactical decision, but because I knew how it would be perceived by some people." She paused to choose her words carefully. "There's always been an assumption that women pilots are more emotional, more likely to break rules, less capable of maintaining discipline under pressure. Your decision to respond without authorization could have reinforced those stereotypes." Kaida had been thinking about the same issue, but it didn't. No, it didn't. Because the outcome was so clearly the right one that even critics had to acknowledge your judgment was sound. And that matters, because it changes the conversation. Instead of debating whether women belong in combat aircraft, people are discussing how to identify and develop the kind of tactical judgment you demonstrated. Rodriguez stopped walking and turned to face her friend directly. "That Pentagon assignment, it's not just about your career. It's about creating space for every woman who comes after you to exercise the same kind of tactical judgment without having to prove herself first." The conversation continued for another hour, covering topics that ranged from career advancement to family considerations, to the broader question of how individual choices influenced institutional change. When they finally returned to their quarters, Qaeda had reached a decision. She would accept General Hawkins' offer. The transition from Al-Udeid to the Pentagon occurred with the efficient speed that characterized military reassignments. Within 3 weeks, Qaeda found herself in an office on the 4th floor of the world's largest office building, surrounded by briefing materials, strategic assessments, and the institutional memory of an organization responsible for global air power projection. Her first day included orientation sessions, security briefings, and meetings with the team she would be joining, a mix of operational officers, strategic planners, and technical specialists tasked with identifying innovations that could provide tactical advantages in rapidly evolving conflict environments. Major Nakamura, General Hawkins said during their initial work session, "I want you to understand the scope of what we're trying to accomplish here. The Peregrine Protocol was successful because it addressed a specific gap between doctrine and tactical reality. But there are dozens of similar gaps across different operational areas." She gestured toward a wall-mounted display showing global military operations. Electronic warfare, cyber operations, special forces integration, urban combat scenarios, humanitarian assistance, coalition coordination. Each of these areas has doctrinal frameworks that were developed for different kinds of conflicts than what we're facing today. Qaeda studied the display, her mind already beginning to process the complexity of modernizing military doctrine across such diverse operational areas. "Ma'am, how do we prioritize which gaps to address first?" "By focusing on areas where outdated doctrine is creating tactical disadvantages for American forces." Hawkins pulled up a series of after-action reports on the main screen. "We start with situations where our people are getting hurt because our procedures don't match the operational environment they're facing." The reports made sobering reading. Mission failures that could have been successes with different tactical approaches. American casualties that might have been prevented with more flexible rules of engagement. Operational objectives that went unmet because doctrine prevented commanders from adapting to unexpected developments. "Ma'am, this looks like it could be a career's worth of work." "It is," Hawkins agreed. "But careers are measured by impact, not duration. The question is whether you want to spend your time flying individual combat missions or reshaping how the Air Force approaches combat operations." As Qaeda settled into her new role, she began to appreciate the broader perspective that came with strategic planning. Individual combat missions, even successful ones like her intervention for Colonel Thorne's unit, were tactical events that affected specific people in specific places. But doctrine development had the potential to influence thousands of missions, potentially saving hundreds of lives and improving operational effectiveness across multiple theaters. Her first major project involved analyzing urban combat scenarios where traditional close air support doctrine proved inadequate. Working with ground commanders who'd faced street-to-street fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan, Qaeda identified patterns where existing procedures created tactical disadvantages. "The problem," explained Colonel James Murphy, a veteran of 3 urban combat deployments, "is that our close air support doctrine assumes clear lines between friendly and enemy forces. But in urban environments, those lines don't exist. You have civilians, friendly forces, hostile forces, and unknown contacts all occupying the same space." The solution required developing new identification protocols, modified weapons employment procedures, and enhanced coordination between air and ground elements. It was complex, time-consuming work that demanded attention to countless details that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. But as the new protocols took shape and began implementation in training exercises, Qaeda felt the satisfaction that came from solving problems that would protect American service members she would never meet.